The sky hadn't known blue in years. No longer a soothing dome above us. It was now a relentless, bruised wound, a sickly shade of orange and crimson that bled into every corner of the world. The sun, when it dared to show itself, hung low and angry, casting long, twisted shadows over a land that seemed to have forgotten how to live. It was as if the sky itself was mourning. Below that scarred sky, the earth had betrayed us. What once were sprawling cities vibrant, buzzing with life had become barren wastelands. Concrete jungles turned to rubble heaps, glass shattered and buried beneath layers of dust and ash. Streets cracked like ancient parchment, veins of rusted metal and twisted rebar exposed like the bones of a dead giant. The landmarks we once pointed to with pride, towers, bridges, plazas, were now grotesque silhouettes against the endless horizon, swallowed by creeping sands, or swallowed whole by yawning fissures in the ground. Rivers that once carried life now lay empty and cracked, like the dry tongues of some great beast gasping its last. The lakes had vanished, leaving salt flats that stretched beyond the eye could see, shimmering with a ghostly white in the faded sunlight. Forests, once thick and alive, were charred skeletons, blackened trunks reaching toward the sky like desperate hands. Wildfires had swept across continents with a fury that no rain could tame. The scorched earth smelled of ash and forgotten hope. The temperature no longer followed any rhythm we could trust. Days scorched with a merciless heat that baked the skin raw, and nights plunged into a bone-deep cold that stole breath and warmth alike. Storms raged without warning, violent bursts of thunder and lightning ripping across the sky, followed by long stretches of oppressive silence and dust-choked air. Climate change had spun the world into chaos, a vicious cycle of extremes that tore away any sense of stability. Gone were the hum of engines, the chatter of crowds, the quiet murmur of distant radios. Government structures had crumbled, their once mighty towers now hollow shells occupied by scavengers, or left to decay in silence. The last vestiges of authority were whispered rumors, spoken with fear, a faction here, a warlord there, but no order, no justice. Humanity itself had fractured. Survivors clung to whatever shelter they could find: underground bunkers, rusting freight containers, caves dug into the cracked earth. Some formed loose tribes, protective and wary, bartering water for food or shelter. Others drifted alone, ghosts in the dust, avoiding contact because trust had become a weapon. Raider gangs prowled the ruins like predators, their eyes always scanning for weakness, their hands never far from crude weapons forged in desperation. Institutions that once defined civilization's schools, hospitals, police were relics in memory. Only the remnants of medicine and science were scavenged and hoarded like precious metals. Any knowledge not tattooed on worn skin or whispered around flickering campfires risked being lost to time. The air carried a persistent scent, a mix of rot and dust, smoke and salt, the smell of earth bleeding dry. Silence was punctuated by the distant howl of wind dragging sand across the ruins, or the sharp crack of a splintering branch. The nights were worst. The shadows seemed to crawl closer, and the cold gnawed at the bones. But the worst of all was the feeling, a suffocating anxiety that gripped every survivor's heart. What came next? Would the skies ever clear? Could the rivers run again? Was this the end, or just another loop in a cycle of decay? Each day was a gamble, a whispered prayer for the smallest mercy. The world had shrunk to the size of a breath, and with every step, the past seemed more like a fading dream, a story too distant to hold on to, but too painful to forget. Yet, in this cracked and dying world, the flicker of life stubbornly persisted. Tiny green shoots, pushing through ash, the distant bark of a lone dog echoing in the silence. A rare rainstorm, brief and hesitant, washing the dust from shattered glass. This was the setting where we survived a world stripped bare and raw, caught in a relentless time loop back to a stone age we never wanted to revisit. but could no longer escape. Asterisk. My name is Eli. That's what I tell whoever's out there on the other end of this crackling radio. Eli is the name I chose when the old world died, and I had to become someone new, someone who could survive. I wasn't always a survivor. Before the world unraveled, I was a scientist. Not the heroic type you see in stories, no capes or grand discoveries. Just a man who believed in facts, data, in a future shaped by reason. I studied the Earth, tracked the changes creeping across the atmosphere, warned of what was coming. No one listened. Or maybe they did, but it was too late. We were already on the edge of the cliff, and nobody pulled us back. Now, I live in the ruins, literal ruins of what was once a city, bustling with life. My home is a battered shack cobbled together from rusted sheets of metal and shattered glass. The roof leaks, the walls groan when the wind pushes hard enough. But it's shelter, and that's all that matters. I survive on scraps water I catch when it rains, roots I dig from the dry earth, and the rare wild rabbit or bird that dares to cross my path. I keep the radio alive with a battered generator powered by old batteries, scavenged from forgotten places. That radio is my lifeline, the thin thread connecting me to other voices in this vast silence. Why do I keep going? Some days it's stubbornness, some days it's guilt. The guilt of those I lost, of promises broken. But mostly, it's hope. Hope that somewhere beyond this endless dust and decay, there is still a chance to find others, to rebuild, to remember what it means to be human. I've seen everything fall apart. I watched my family slip through my fingers like smoke. My wife, Mara, was one of the first to go when the sickness spread, a fever that no medicine could touch. Our son Jonah held my hand the last night he was alive. I still hear his whispered prayers in the silence. Those losses are scars I carry beneath my skin. They weigh on me, but they don't break me. If anything, they remind me what I fight for, the memory of love, of connection, of a life that was real. Every day is a battle against more than just hunger and thirst. It's a fight against loneliness, despair, the creeping numbness that tries to settle in your bones. The nights are the hardest. When the cold wraps around you like a shroud, and the silence grows too loud, you start questioning everything. Why keep breathing? Why keep hoping? But then I speak into the radio, and I hear a crackle, a voice answering back. Sometimes it's just static, but sometimes it's a word, a sentence, a sign that I'm not alone. That connection, however, fragile, keeps the fire burning inside me. I've become a storyteller, not by choice, but by necessity. I tell the world what I see, what I feel, hoping that my words might reach someone who needs to hear them. I talk about the sky, the dust, storms, the wildfires that chase the horizon like ghosts. I speak of the small victories, a rain shower that lasts a day, a patch of edible roots, a safe night without raids. Speaking helps. It reminds me I'm still human, that even when the world loops backward into a stone age of survival and savagery, the spark of who we were still flickers in the dark. I'm no hero, I'm no savior, just a man with a radio and memories, walking a tightrope stretched over the ruins of a dead world. Every step is uncertain, every breath a victory. Sometimes, when the wind dies down and the dust settles, I close my eyes and remember the sound of Mara's laugh, the way Jonah's hand felt in mine, the warmth of a fire shared among friends. Those memories are fragile, like glass edges cutting into my heart, but they're also why I keep going, for the chance to live again, to find others who carry their own stories, their own scars. This world is broken. The loop drags us backward, into dust and stone and hunger. But as long as I have this voice, as long as the radio hums, I'll keep telling our story, the story of survival, of loss, of hope, because sometimes, in the static between words, that's where life hides. Asterisk, the drought has stretched its fingers deep into the earth, fingers that never loosen their grip. The sky hasn't wept in what feels like an eternity. For years now, the clouds have vanished, swallowed by a relentless heat wave that turns every drop of moisture into vapor before it can reach the soil. The Missouri River, once a roaring artery of life, is now nothing more than cracked clay and dust, a hollow scar on the land, a cruel reminder of what we've lost. Each day survival gets harder. The well near my shelter, once a reliable trickle, is now just a dusty hole. I've dug deeper, but the water table has sunk too far. Sometimes I find only salt and grit. The roots I forage are brittle and scarce, the game more ghost than flesh. Food and water are no longer just necessities. They are luxuries fought over with teeth and blades. The air is thick with dust that clings to lungs like poison. Every breath burns, every cough steals a little more strength. Wildfires rage unchecked, fed by brittle forests and dry grasslands, painting the horizon with flames and ash. Smoke drifts like a shroud, turning days into nights and choking the sun's faint light. Storms, when they come, aren't gentle showers. They're violent outbursts, sheets of rain so heavy they tear at the earth, washing away the fragile topsoil and any hope of regrowth. But these storms are rare, leaving long gaps of unbearable dryness in their wake. The world's climate has become a violent pendulum swinging between extremes, unforgiving heat that bakes the land, and sudden catastrophic floods that drown what little survived the dry months. It's a cycle that kills everything caught in its rhythm, including us. In this wasteland, the line between friend and foe blurs. I've met others on the road, some seeking safety, others hunting for anything to steal. Alliances are fragile and short-lived. I remember a group who offered to share their water. They were genuine for a moment, but paranoia runs deep. When a stranger's eyes linger too long on your supplies, trust dies quietly. Raiders have become the new predators, bandits who roam the ruins, armed with makeshift weapons. In desperation, they take what they want by force, leaving behind fear and shattered hope. I've had to run more times than I can count, leaving behind shelter, warmth, sometimes even friends. The nights echo with the distant sound of gunfire and screams, a grim lullaby in this broken world. The few survivor groups that remain cling to strongholds, fortified ruins, or underground bunkers, places where water is rationed like gold, and every meal is a gift earned through toil or barter. But even these refuges aren't safe. Supplies dwindle, tempers flare, and the outside threats never stop coming. Fuel is another nightmare. The generator that powers my radio runs on scavenged batteries, and the odd jerrycan of diesel found deep in forgotten garages. Each drop is precious, rationed to keep the signal alive or fragile connection to others. Without it, isolation isn't just loneliness, it's death. Science, the language I once trusted, now tells a grim story. The atmosphere is a thick soup of greenhouse gases, trapping heat like a relentless oven. The polar ice caps, once massive and slow-moving, have melted faster than anyone predicted, flooding coastlines and then freezing in unpredictable cycles. Ocean currents have shifted, disrupting weather patterns globally. Temperatures now soar to record highs over 50 degrees Celsius in some places, turning the earth into a furnace during the day and a freezer at night. The jet streams that used to bring steady weather have fractured, allowing storms to rage unchecked or vanish altogether. The soil itself is dying. Without rain to nourish it, microorganisms vanish, and the once fertile land turns to dust. Crops fail year after year, and seeds that survived the initial collapse refuse to sprout. The plants that remain are tough and bitter, barely enough to sustain life. I explain this on air sometimes, hoping that if someone hears, they'll understand the stakes. I say, we are trapped in a feedback loop. The more we lose, the less the earth can heal. The less it heals, the worse the disasters become. It's a cycle, spiraling out of control. Every piece of data I once studied has become a warning etched into every sunrise, every cracked field, every desperate face I pass. Survival isn't just a daily grind, it's a race against a world unraveling faster than we can adapt. Water must be purified with charcoal and cloth. Food scavenged from ruins or gathered from the wild always with caution, because poison hides in many forms. Each ration is measured, every step outside a risk. Dust storms can come without warning, forcing us to shelter and hope our lungs hold out. Wildfires can trap you in seconds, and the raiders, they won't hesitate to take your life for a scrap of food or a flask of water. Sometimes, I broadcast warnings about upcoming weather changes, based on patterns I've learned to read in the sky, in the wind, in the temperature swings. I tell those listening to find shelter before the next dust storm, to conserve water, to avoid conflict when possible. But the truth is harsh. There are no safe places left. The world has become a battlefield, and nature itself seems bent on our extinction. Despite this, we keep moving. We adapt. We survive. I think back to the world that was, how easy it was to take clean water, steady weather, full shelves for granted. Now, every drop, every bite, every breath is a victory fought for with grim determination. The crisis isn't just outside, it's inside us too. The strain wears on minds as much as bodies. Fear, exhaustion, despair, they spread like disease, infecting hope and turning people against one another. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, a flicker of kindness breaks through. A shared meal, a whispered promise of better days. That's what keeps me alive, the hope that amidst this relentless crisis, humanity can find a way to turn the tide. But the clock is ticking, and the drought, the fires, the storms, they don't wait. Asterisk, the air is thick with dust, a choking veil that clings to my throat and fills every corner of the world like a slow suffocation. It's in the rustling of dead leaves, in the whispering of broken glass, in every breath I take. The sky remains an angry swirl of orange and gray, a permanent bruise that the sun can't heal. Water has become a ghost. My barrels, once half full, from the last meager rain, are now dry and cracked. The well near my shelter, my lifeline, is fading fast. Yesterday, I spent hours digging at its edge, desperate to reach a vein of moisture, only to find dust and salt. It felt like the earth was mocking me. There's no room for error anymore. One misstep could mean death. Food isn't much better. Roots and bitter leaves no longer fill my belly the way they once did. I've set traps along the cracked creek bed, but the animals have grown scarce, either fled or hunted down to near extinction. The taste of scavenged canned goods still haunts me, sour, metallic, a shadow of past comforts. Fuel is another kind of treasure. My radio runs on borrowed time, powered by scavenged batteries and the occasional jerrycan of diesel, found deep in abandoned garages. Each hour of broadcast feels like a gamble. Is it worth using precious energy to reach out, to call into the void? But I do it anyway, because sometimes, in the static between words, I hear voices, other survivors like me, fighting against the endless loop of dust and fire. Raiders have been moving closer. I spotted them last week, a ragtag group with weapons crudely fashioned from scavenged metal and broken glass. Their eyes were hard and cold, their smiles sharp and empty. They don't barter or plead. They take what they want. I had to flee, leaving behind a fire that had warmed me for weeks. Survival in this world means constant vigilance. Every sound could be the crack of a gun, every shadow a threat. Trust is a currency far too expensive to spend lightly. But amid this grinding misery, I've heard whispers, stories passed in the flicker of campfires and the crackle of old radios. A myth, maybe, but something I can't ignore. They say there's a place beyond the mountains, to the north, a valley untouched by the time loop, where water runs clear and fields bloom wild. A community lives there, they say, thriving in a pocket of the old world that somehow escaped destruction. I want to believe it. I have to. Hope is a dangerous thing in these days. fragile and easily shattered. It can lift you up or crush you beneath the weight of disappointment. Still, the thought of that valley, that sanctuary, is a flame in the darkness. I wrestle with the question, should I risk everything to find it? Or am I chasing a ghost? A lie told to keep dying hearts beating a little longer. The thought haunts me when I lie awake under the bruised sky, listening to the distant howl of the wind and the crackle of my radio. My legs ache from days spent scavenging. My hands are raw from hauling water and wood. And yet, the spark refuses to die, sometimes. I wonder if this hope is a blessing or a curse. I broadcast the rumors, hoping to find others who believe. Maybe, together, we can reach that valley. Maybe it's not a myth, but I know the dangers. Raiders lurk on every path, and the land itself is turning against us. The drought deepens, the dust storms grow fiercer, and the nights colder. Yet, I keep moving forward, because in this endless loop of Stone Age survival, the only way out is through. The sky darkened fast, faster than anything I'd seen before. At first, it was just a shadow creeping over the cracked earth, swallowing the orange haze like a spreading stain. Then it grew, a wall of black rolling in from the horizon, blotting out the sun until the world was swallowed whole in a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. The generator hummed, a desperate last breath before sputtering weakly, threatening to die. The radio's crackle turned to static, then silence. I knew deep in my bones that whatever came next could end everything. It was a dust storm unlike any before, a monstrous tempest born from the parched earth and scorching winds. It roared toward me like a living thing, carrying death in its choking breath. I had only moments to decide: stay and try to ride it out in the fragile shelter I'd built, or abandon it all and seek higher ground. Risking exposure and the dangerous trek through raider-infested ruins. Memories surged Mara's face. Jonah's whispered prayers, the promises I made when the world still had a future. Could I let them go? Could I abandon the last fragile thread holding me to hope? I grabbed what I could: a worn backpack, the radio's spare batteries, a flask half full of water, and stepped into the storm's edge. The air hit like a wall, thick with dust and grit, clawing at my skin, tearing at my lungs. Each breath was a fight, each step a battle. Visibility dropped to a few feet, the world reduced to a swirling chaos of brown and black. But then, through the haze, I saw it: a faint shimmer, a glint of something solid and alive. I stumbled toward it, desperate, heart pounding like a war drum. The shimmer grew into a pool of water, a deep, clear spring bubbling up from the cracked earth, untouched by the drought's cruel hand. Around it, wild green shoots pushed through the dust. Fragile but defiant, I fell to my knees, drinking greedily, tasting life for the first time in months. But the moment was broken by voices: raiders, shouting and yelling, closing in fast. I faced a choice: fight to protect this miracle, or run and leave it behind. Adrenaline surged. With makeshift weapons scavenged over months, I stood my ground, shouting warnings into the storm's roar. The raiders hesitated, then pressed forward. The battle was fierce, raw, desperate. I fought not just for water, but for every whispered hope that maybe, just maybe, survival was still possible. When the dust finally settled, the raiders had retreated, broken and scattered. I sat by the spring, the taste of victory bittersweet on my lips. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about what kind of world we chose to build from the ashes, whether to cling to fear and violence or to hold on to hope and connection. As the storm cleared and the sky began to pale, I realized this spring was more than water. It was a symbol, a spark, a chance. I picked up the radio, its static returning as the generator stuttered back to life, into the airwaves. I spoke a message of warning, but also of hope, because in this broken, looping world. Sometimes, the hardest choice is the one that leads you back to yourself. Asterisk, the storm passed, but the world didn't reset. It didn't heal. It left behind a silence thick and heavy, the kind that presses on your skin and settles deep in your bones. I stood at the edge of the spring, that fragile oasis in the wasteland, watching the water ripple softly, as if mocking the chaos that had just unfolded. The raiders were gone, scattered back into the dust and shadows, broken but not defeated. I was left alone with the spring, a small pocket of life in a landscape that had forgotten how to nurture anything. For a moment, the hope that had carried me here flickered like a candle in the wind. Could this be the beginning of something new, or just another cruel trick played by a dying world? The water was pure, cool against my parched lips. It reminded me of a time long ago, a time before loss, before collapse. That taste, that simple touch of life, was a gift I hadn't dared to hope for. But survival wasn't just about water anymore. It was about what came next. Could I protect this spring? Could I build something here? A community? A refuge? A future? The earth around me, though battered, showed signs of stubborn resilience. Green shoots pushed through the ash and dust, fragile but alive. The fire had burned the surface, but beneath it, life was quietly stirring. Still, the world beyond. This little haven was as harsh as ever. The drought continued its slow, merciless siege. Dust storms still roared over the plains. The cold nights crept in without mercy. My body ached from the battle, but it was my mind that bore the heavier scars. The memories of the raiders, the faces twisted in anger, the sound of their voices. The fear in their eyes haunted me. I realized that hope in this world was never free. It came with a cost. I sat by the spring, cradling a flask of water, and thought of Mara and Jonah. I wondered if they would have believed in this place. Would they have hoped, as I did, that a new beginning was possible? The radio sputtered back to life, crackling with static and faint voices. I reached for it, my hands trembling. "Eli, you there?" The voice was weak but unmistakable, a signal from another survivor. Somewhere, beyond the dust and ruin, there were others. That moment changed everything. The loneliness that had clung to me like a second skin began to lift, replaced by a cautious, fragile hope. I spoke into the radio, sharing the location of the spring, the story of the battle, and the faint promise of life that still flickered in this broken world. Survival wasn't just about enduring anymore. It was about rebuilding, about connection. As the days passed, I worked to protect the spring, setting traps and watches against those who might come with darker intentions. I sent messages out on the airwaves, calling for others to come, to find this haven and join me in defending it. Inside, I was still the same broken man, scarred by loss, haunted by memories, but something had shifted. The weight of despair was lighter, carried by the strength of hope. Nature, fragile and battered, was beginning its slow dance toward recovery. The green shoots grew taller, small animals returned cautiously, and the water sang a quiet song of life. The world wasn't whole again. Not yet. The loop of destruction wasn't broken, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like we might bend it, if only slightly. I looked out over the cracked earth, the endless dust, and the bruised sky. This was our new reality. Harsh, uncertain, but alive. And as long as I was breathing, as long as the radio hummed its static song, I would keep fighting. For Mara, for Jonah, for all of us, for the hope that one day, this Stone Age time loop might finally break. Asterisk, the storm passed, but the world didn't reset. It didn't heal. Instead, it left behind scars, reminders of what was lost and what might never return. I stood at the edge of that fragile spring, the small pool of water that had become more than just a source of life. It was a symbol, a fragile beacon against the endless dust and decay. The water shimmered, clear and cool, untouched by the relentless drought that had claimed so much. It was a miracle in a world where miracles had become rarer than rain. The raiders were gone. For now, the battle had left its mark-scorched earth. Broken bodies whispered fears, but I had held the spring. Against all odds, I had protected it. Hope, though battered and fragile, had found a foothold. I knelt by the water and cupped it in my hands, the coolness seeping into my parched skin. The taste was sweeter than I remembered, a reminder of a time when life was abundant and unbroken. But that time was gone, lost in the endless loop of destruction and survival. Looking out over the cracked earth and the distant horizon, I realized how small this victory was against the vastness of the world's collapse. The drought still burned. The land, dust storms still roared across the plains, and the nights grew colder with each passing moon. Yet, here this tiny oasis life clung on. Green shoots pushed through ash-covered soil. Insects buzzed quietly among the grasses. Birds, cautious but curious, returned to sip from the water's edge. The earth was healing, ever so slowly. Beneath the weight of destruction, it was a reminder that even in the harshest places, resilience can take root. Inside me, things had shifted too. The man who once fought only to survive had begun to dream again, not of the past, but of the future. Uncertain, yes, but filled with possibility. I thought about Mara and Jonah, the family I had lost to this endless nightmare. Their memories were no longer just wounds but fuel, fire to keep me moving forward, to build something beyond survival. The radio crackled to life, and through the static, a faint voice emerged. Another survivor, distant but real. It was the first connection I'd had in months, a lifeline reaching through the desolation. That moment sparked something I hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. I spoke into the radio, sharing the location of the spring, the story of the battle, the faint hope growing in this battered land. I sent out calls for others, for those who still dreamed of life beyond mere existence. Each day, I set watches around the spring, fortifying it against those who would take rather than share. The world outside remained unforgiving. The raiders still prowled. The weather grew harsher, resources scarcer. But here, in this small refuge, a different kind of struggle was unfolding. The struggle to protect hope. I learned that hope was not a passive thing. It required vigilance, sacrifice, and sometimes painful choices. The scars I carried both on my body and in my mind were reminders of what it took to survive. But they were also proof of resilience, of a spirit that refused to break. Sometimes, at night, I sat by the spring and listened to the wind, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath me. The silence was different now, quieter, softer, filled with the whisper of growth. The world was not healed, far from it, but the seeds of recovery were there, fragile and green, waiting for the chance to take root and grow. And so was I. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The drought could deepen, storms could rage anew, raiders could return stronger. But for today, I had this spring, this life, and that was enough, because survival was no longer the only story. There was something more: hope. And as long as that flickered in the dust, I would keep fighting, not just to live, but to build, to connect, to remember what it means to be human. The loop might still turn, dragging the world backward into Stone Age shadows, but maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to break free. I don't know what tomorrow holds, not really. The world is still broken, fractured beyond repair in many places, scarred by the endless loop of fire and drought, dust and decay. The storms still rage, the raiders still roam, and the land fights against us every single day. But today I have enough water, enough strength, enough hope to fight for just one more sunrise. Hope is a fragile thing in this world. It slips through your fingers like dust, vanishing before you can grasp it fully. Sometimes, it feels like nothing more than a cruel trick, a spark that lights only to be snuffed out by the weight of reality. Yet here I am, still breathing, still standing beside this spring, this tiny miracle in the wasteland. There is no finality to survival, not anymore. No grand conclusion or heroic ending. Just a series of days, each one a battle, each one a chance to keep going. The loop hasn't broken. The Stone Age time loop drags on, dragging the world backward as it threatens to consume what little life remains. But maybe that's the point. Maybe survival isn't about escaping the loop. Maybe it's about learning to dance with it, to find moments of light amid the endless dusk. I've come to understand that hope isn't some grand discovery or shining beacon on a hill. It's the small things: a shared meal, a whispered promise, the sound of rain in the distance, the feel of cool water on cracked skin. It's the decision to keep speaking into the radio, to reach out into the silence, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's the choice to protect this spring, this fragile heart of life, knowing that doing so might mean facing the worst of humanity again. I don't pretend the path ahead is easy. The drought will continue. The dust storms will return. The nights will grow colder, but I also don't believe the world is done. Not yet. The green shoots at the spring remind me that life pushes back, that even in the harshest conditions, resilience finds a way, and so must we. To those listening, those who still hear my voice crackling through the static, I send this message: stay alive, stay human, hold on to whatever small piece of hope you can find. Share it, protect it, nurture it, because as long as we are breathing, as long as even one spring flows somewhere in this broken world, there is a chance to rebuild, a chance to remember who we were and who we can still be. The future is uncertain. The loop may continue its cruel dance, but we do not walk it alone. We walk it together, and that, maybe, is enough to keep the fire burning.